Does this exist anywhere else other than the United States? Lobbyists on that level?
No, of course not.
Hey, everybody, let's take a look at Bernie Sanders talking to Joe Rogan 5 years ago about Medicare for all and his quote-unquote radical socialist, democratic socialist policies. Specifically here, we're going to be focusing on the idea of Medicare for all. And of course, Joe Rogan, who so recently has swung around and endorsed Donald Trump in this recent election we've had, seems to be vibing on what Bernie is saying. But I think it's important for all of us to, even if we're not likely to get it under the Trump administration, I think it makes an enormous amount of sense. Let's take a listen.
In 1965, you had Lyndon Johnson as president. And by the way, this idea of national health care, this has been talked about literally since Teddy Roosevelt. This is not a new concept. Healthcare is a human right. That's what Teddy Roosevelt was talking about. That's what FDR was talking about. Harry Truman was talking about it. Kennedy was talking about it. Kennedy got killed. Lyndon Johnson picked up the mantle. And their idea was, according to people in their administration, we'll start with the elderly who are most impacted by healthcare costs and sickness. We'll start, and they did. In 1965, without the technology we have today, they implemented Medicare. 19 million people, elderly people, signed up in the first year. So if you could start a brand new program and have 19 million people sign up with a technology that is way, way behind where we are today, why can't we, over a 4-year period, simply expand that program? I don't think it's such a difficult operation.
So when you talk about the drug companies and the lobbyists and the enormous amount of money that they spend, does this exist anywhere else other than the United States? Lobbyists on that level?
No, of course not. And the reason, in Canada, what you have is you have a national health care program and so forth. And they sit down and, they negotiate with the drug companies. They have their own approach. But every other major country on earth says to the drug companies, of course you can't charge us any price you want. This is a reasonable price. Tell me what your profits are, what your expenditures are. This is a price. For us, you can walk in, if you have an illness, you could walk into the pharmacy tomorrow and the price has been doubled. And you say to the pharmacist, what happened? He said, they just raised their prices. They could do it any day they want, any price they want.
People criticize Bernie Sanders because a friend of mine who is actually in the medical profession refers to him as a communist. That's not what he's about. The implication my friend makes is that Bernie Sanders is opposed to profit. And, I don't think that's the case at all. No one's saying that a corporation or a business person can't make a profit. What Bernie Sanders is against is the absolute runaway disparity in wealth based on completely unchecked profiteering. And that leaves us this incredible gulf, where we can draw reasonable lines and there's a lot of negotiation in there. But right now, it's completely off the leash, folks, and he's right. You could have a life-saving medication that at the whim of the pharmaceutical companies goes up to an absolutely unaffordable price just because they decided they wanted to make more money on it.
Now, lobbyists are, in general, when people talk about lobbyists, it's an unattractive term. We think of it in terms of a negative. We don't think of, oh, thank God there's lobbyists. We think, wow, there's someone with enormous amounts of money using that money to gain influence on politicians, and it shapes regular people. It shapes our lives mostly in a negative way. This is the way most people look at it. I'm not saying it's correct. Why do we have that system in place? Like, why do we have lobbyists? Why is it legal for someone to spend exorbitant amounts of money to affect our civilization, to affect the way our culture works?
All right, now you're taking us into a whole new area.
Yeah.
All right, let's look. All right, let me detour and I'll come back.
Please do.
All right. Today in America, you got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of the American society. You don't see that on television too much, do you?
No, you don't.
3 people.
Just let that sink in for a minute. 3 people control more wealth than the entire bottom half economically of the American population. That's insane.
Top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 92%. Listen to this. This is a statistic we recently saw. came from the Federal Reserve. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. The bottom half of America has seen a $900 billion decline in their wealth. So what you have in America today is a relatively small number of incredibly wealthy people. And I deal with these guys every day. People say, oh, we're talking about rich. You don't know what rich is, what multi-billion dollar operations are. Incredible power over our society. And if you were the pharmaceutical industry, and last year 10 companies made $69 billion in profit, you're sitting around right now saying, all right, that's great. How do we do better next year? What strategy do we have? We're going to put a lot of ads on. We're going to work with during the CNN debate that I participated in recently, in the debate, right in the middle of the debate, the drug companies and the insurance companies had an ad telling how bad Medicare for all would be. So they're smart guys. And they use their power over politicians. They use their power over the media. They spend billions of dollars on advertising on media to make sure that they make as much as they can in profit. But it's not any different with Wall Street. It's not any different with the fossil fuel industry or the prison industrial complex. These guys have wealth, they have power, and they could care less about the needs of working people in this country.
That's a good distinction, right? This was made a number of times. Well, they're not trying to kill us, right? They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to make a profit. They just don't care if it kills us.
And that's the dynamic of American politics right now. And in our campaign, look, we're taking them all on. And I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But we are taking on all of these entities and all of their wealth and all of their power. And that's what a political revolution is about.
So the real problem seems to be that they have this strategy of unlimited growth. Not that they're not providing medication that people need to save their lives. I mean, it's obviously important to have pharmaceutical companies.
Of course.
Right. So there's good that they provide, but the business aspect of it is where the problem lies, right?
Right. Look, they have great researchers, but if you check how they even spend their money, they will tell you this, all of their money on research and development. We're tackling cancer, we're tackling diabetes, Alzheimer's. The truth is, of course they are. But the bulk of their money is going off into what we call Me Too drugs. They make modest changes in a drug, which really doesn't improve people's well-being in order to make profits. So the answer is yes. We need, obviously, vigorous research and development. And by the way, your tax dollars, all of our tax dollars, often goes to that research, and we don't get the benefit of it in terms of lower prices.
So it's a business model issue.
Exactly.
It's a greed issue.
You've got it.
And how would one stop that? When you're dealing with the kind of influence that you're talking about with $69 billion in a year, I mean, the resources they have, how would you stop that?
Well, that is kind of what we call the $64 question.
Yeah.
I mean, all right, and I'll tell you what I think. This is what I believe. If you think back on American history, and you think about the real changes that have taken place in society. You think about the labor movement and working class people standing up and saying to their employers, we're not going to be treated like animals anymore. You can't hire and fire us. You can't work us 15 hours a day. We deserve dignity. And you think about the growth of the labor movement, of millions of people beginning to stand together and fight. You think about the civil rights movement, And it wasn't just Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was, again, millions of African Americans and their white allies saying, we're going to end segregation and racism in this country. Think about the women's movement. 100 years ago, women in America didn't even have the right to vote. Think about the gay rights movement. Think about the environmental. The only way that change takes place is when ordinary people come together and stand up and fight and say that the status quo is not working. And that's what I believe, and that's what we're trying to do. So the message of our campaign is it's us, not me, because I can't do it alone. Let me be very honest with you. If I were elected president tomorrow, I can't do the things that I would like to do, that I'm campaigning on, unless millions of people were working with me to tell the corporate elite that they cannot get it all.
So what do you think, folks? It seems eminently possible to me, maybe not now that we've just elected Trump 2.0. But I've always thought Bernie Sanders makes a ton of sense. And, Joe Rogan gets painted with an extremist brush. I I think part of the reason why he's so popular is he's an active listener. He asks the kind of, questions that the average person might think to ask. He's got a good way of relating to his guest. I think if there's anything really negative, he seems swayed by the last person he heard, and that's a criticism people level at Donald Trump as well. I still have not had a Trump supporter explain to me convincingly why they think this is the only way forward, right? I mean, I understand entrenched people on both the left and the right, but, I'm getting a little off topic. I want to know what you think. Are you a Joe Rogan fan? Are you a Joe Rogan hater? Are you a Bernie Sanders fan? Are you a Bernie Sanders hater? I think this is an affable conversation where I think they touch on some really important points, and some changes seem like really common sense and relatively straightforward in terms of putting them into effect. And then others, the sort of 64. I always heard it the $64,000 question, but Bernie Sanders said the $64 question is how you get around the entrenched opposition, right? And the amount of money and weight in lobbying and politics now. How do we back out of this predicament that we have found ourselves in? And I agree with him that it takes grassroots action and all of us coming together. Well, that's easy to say, but we need someone to lead the way, someone or someone's to lead us the way. Maybe that's you. Is that you? If that's you, let me know in the comments.